Imagine standing deep inside the Great Pyramid of Giza, surrounded by millions of tons of stone, where the air itself feels heavy with history. In that vast, shadowy chamber, something remarkable happens, or rather, something doesn't happen. There is no echo, no distant murmur, just a deep, resonant quiet that seems to swallow sound itself. This isn't an accident of construction or a quirk of nature. Its design intentional, sophisticated, and spiritually profound. For centuries, we've marveled at the visual splendor of ancient sacred spaces, but we may have missed one of their most powerful features, their silence. Across civilizations and millennia, from the sun-baked temples of Egypt to the forest-enshrouded shrines of India, architects and builders were not just creating structures to be seen, they were shaping experiences to be felt in the deepest quiet of the human soul. They understood something we're only now beginning to rediscover: that silence is not empty, it is full. It is a medium, a message, and a meeting place between the earthly and the divine. In these spaces, soundlessness was as vital as grandeur, as meaningful as alignment with the stars, and as deliberate as the choice of every stone. In this video, we're going to explore what I like to call the blueprints of silence, the hidden architectural principles that ancient cultures used to craft environments of profound quiet. We'll walk together through the king's chamber in the Great Pyramid, stand beneath the soaring dome of the Pantheon, and enter the rock-cut meditation halls of ancient India, uncovering how and why these cultures valued silence as a sacred technology. This is more than a historical tour. It's an invitation to listen to the past in a new way, to understand how the absence of sound shaped some of humanity's most enduring spiritual traditions, and to reconsider what these ancient innovations can teach us about designing meaning and mindfulness into our own lives today. To truly grasp why ancient architects went to such extraordinary lengths to engineer silence, we must first step into their worldview, a perspective where quiet wasn't simply a lack of noise, but a powerful, palpable force. For these cultures, silence was the fertile ground from which all creation sprang. The ancient Egyptians, for instance, referred to the state before creation as none, a formless, silent, watery abyss. It was from this profound quiet that the first god, Atum, emerged to speak the world into existence. Therefore, to enter a silent space was to return to that primordial moment of pure potential, to stand at the very threshold where the divine could manifest once more. A temple wasn't just a building, it was a recreation of this cosmic principle, and its silence was the essential medium for the gods to make their will known to the priests within. This concept reverberated across the ancient world, finding unique expression in different philosophical traditions. In Greece, thinkers like Pythagoras didn't just see mathematics as the language of the universe, he saw silence as its necessary counterpart. He required his students to observe long periods of silence before his lectures, believing that this practice purified the mind and made it receptive to complex, eternal truths. This wasn't about emptying the mind, but about preparing it, creating an internal quietude that allowed for a deeper, more resonant understanding of harmony and order. For Pythagoreans, a noisy mind was a distracted mind, incapable of perceiving the subtle music of the cosmos. Traveling east, we find that this reverence for quiet forms the very bedrock of Hindu and Buddhist spiritual practice. Here, the ultimate goal is enlightenment, a state of being that transcends the chatter of the ego and the senses. In these traditions, the internal noise of our thoughts is seen as the primary obstacle to spiritual awakening. Meditative silence, therefore, isn't passive. It's an active process of dissolving the self, of listening so deeply that one begins to hear the fundamental hum of reality itself. The Sanskrit word for this is sunyata, often translated as emptiness, but more accurately understood as a state of pure potentiality, free from the distortions of individual perception. This shared philosophical foundation is what directly informed the hands of the builders and the visions of the priests. It's the crucial link between an abstract spiritual idea and the physical stone and mortar we still marvel at today. If silence is the channel for the divine, then architecture must become the instrument that protects and amplifies that channel. You don't just build a wall to keep people out, you build it to keep noise out. You don't just design a chamber to house a statue, you design it to house a specific, profound experience of inner quiet. The very purpose of these sacred structures was to facilitate a transformation in the individual, to move them from the profane, noisy world of everyday life into a sacred, silent realm where they could encounter something greater than themselves. Every choice, from the thickness of the walls to the layout of the chambers, was made in service of this goal, weaving silence into the very fabric of their purpose. This sophisticated approach to sound management reveals a profound understanding of physics that we often assume is a modern development. The ancient builders were, in effect, early acoustic engineers. They didn't just build for eternity, they built for experience, manipulating the very air within their structures to serve a higher purpose. Consider the Roman use of hollow tubes, known as tubuli, embedded within the walls of structures like the baths of Caracalla. These weren't merely structural or for heating, they acted as a primitive but effective resonance chamber system, trapping sound vibrations and preventing them from bouncing back into the main hall, thus preserving a hushed atmosphere even amidst the echoes of a bustling public space. This wasn't guesswork, it was applied science born from centuries of observation and refinement. The choice of materials was equally deliberate and reveals a global understanding of sonic properties. In Egypt, the progression from the noisy, sun-baked sandstone exteriors of a temple to the cool, silent granite of its inner sanctum wasn't just a symbolic journey from the profane to the sacred. It was a physical acoustic filter. Granite's dense, crystalline structure is exceptionally effective at absorbing sound energy, especially the lower frequencies of human speech, effectively muting the outside world. Conversely, in the great hypostyle halls where rituals involving chant or music might occur, the architects selected stones that could carry specific tones, guiding the sound in a controlled manner before the final approach to the silent Holy of Holies. This material intelligence extended to the Greeks, who used a specific porous limestone that deadened echoes, and to Byzantine builders who mixed ceramics and light aggregate into their dome constructions to absorb certain frequencies and create that characteristic ethereal resonance that seems to hover between sound and silence. Perhaps the most brilliant aspect of their acoustic design lies in the use of geometry. Sacred geometry wasn't just about symbolic ratios pleasing to the gods. It was a practical toolkit for managing sound waves. A perfect square room, for instance, creates standing waves and sharp echoes where sound gets trapped bouncing between parallel surfaces. Ancient architects consistently avoided this. They built trapezoidal chambers, apses, and curved walls that naturally diffuse sound, preventing it from concentrating in any one spot. The dome of the Pantheon is a masterclass in this. Its perfect hemispherical shape and coffered ceiling don't just reduce structural weight, they break up sound waves into smaller, less energetic reflections. A whisper spoken at the base of the dome travels upward along the curve and dissipates, rather than crashing back down as a disruptive echo. This creates that awe-inspiring effect where the space feels vast and grand, yet intimately quiet, a testament to the Romans' ability to use form and function in the service of spiritual atmosphere. This intricate mastery forces us to reconsider the capabilities of these ancient cultures. Achieving true silence is far more complex than merely blocking noise. It requires an understanding of reflection, absorption, diffusion, and resonance. The fact that builders thousands of years ago could calculate or intuitively grasp the angles needed to deflect a sound wave or the thickness of a wall needed to dampen a specific frequency is nothing short of remarkable. It suggests a level of intentionality in every cut of stone and every architectural curve that goes far beyond simple construction. They weren't just building spaces to be looked at, they were crafting precise sensory environments to be felt, environments where the absence of earthly noise was the primary medium for facilitating a connection to something beyond. This technical prowess, hidden in plain sight within the stones, is a silent language of its own, speaking volumes about their deep desire to architect not just with stone, but with the very nature of perception itself. Now let's take this understanding of ancient acoustic principles and apply it to perhaps the most iconic silent space ever constructed, the King's Chamber deep within the Great Pyramid of Giza. Modern acoustic surveys conducted in this massive granite room reveal something extraordinary. Despite its vast stone surfaces that should create booming echoes, the chamber has an unusually short reverberation time. Sound doesn't linger here as it should. Instead, it seems to be absorbed almost immediately by the very walls themselves. This isn't a random characteristic of the construction. It appears to be a meticulously engineered feature. The chamber's precise dimensions, the specific geometry of its walls and ceiling, and the incredible density of the red granite used throughout all contribute to creating this unique sonic environment. Researchers using sophisticated equipment have measured how different frequencies behave within the space, finding that certain tones, particularly those in the range of human chanting or ritual instruments, are neutralized or dampened significantly more than others. The granite sarcophagus positioned precisely along the chamber's central axis plays a fascinating role in this acoustic puzzle. Unlike the surrounding walls, this massive stone box acts as a resonant object, but its specific dimensions and the properties of the granite from which it's carved cause it to absorb rather than reflect particular sound frequencies. Some researchers suggest it may have been tuned to cancel out specific harmonic ranges, possibly those associated with human vocal frequencies used in ceremonial practices. This creates an almost surreal auditory experience where normal conversation sounds strangely muted and distant, while complete silence feels thicker and more profound than in most natural environments. The effect is heightened by the chamber's isolation buried beneath millions of tons of limestone. The space is naturally insulated from external noise, creating what might be the most effectively sound, isolated room constructed before the modern era. Beyond the physical properties of the chamber itself, there's compelling evidence that the pyramid's celestial alignments contributed to its acoustic character. The narrow shafts leading from the king's chamber precisely align with specific stars important in Egyptian cosmology, particularly those associated with the pharaoh's journey to the afterlife. These shafts aren't just visual sightlines, they function as Helmholtz resonators, a type of acoustic filter that allows certain frequencies to pass while blocking others. During specific astronomical events, when these shafts were precisely aligned with their target stars, they may have created standing waves or resonance effects within the chamber itself. This suggests the architects understood that celestial events weren't just visual phenomena, but carried vibrational qualities that could be harnessed within their architectural designs. The spiritual purpose behind this acoustic engineering becomes clear when we consider the chamber's function in the pharaoh's journey to the afterlife. In Egyptian belief, the transition between earthly existence and eternal life was a delicate process requiring perfect conditions. Noise and distraction weren't just inconveniences, they were potential threats to this sacred passage. The profound silence of the chamber would have served multiple purposes. It created a space free from worldly distractions where priests could perform uninterrupted rituals. It may have enhanced specific meditative or altered states of consciousness believed necessary for communicating with the gods, and it symbolically represented the silent, primordial waters of none from which all creation emerged. This wasn't merely a tomb designed to preserve a body. It was a sophisticated spiritual device engineered to facilitate one of the most important transitions in Egyptian cosmology. What makes the Great Pyramid's acoustic design particularly remarkable is that it represents a convergence of multiple advanced understandings: structural engineering, material science, astronomy, and spiritual philosophy, all working in harmony to create a specific experiential environment. The builders weren't just stacking stones, they were composing silence itself, using the physical properties of their materials and the mathematical precision of their geometry to craft a space that actively shaped human perception. This challenges our conventional view of ancient structures as primarily visual or symbolic achievements. They were multisensory environments designed to create specific psychological and spiritual states through deliberate manipulation of sound, light, and space. The Great Pyramid stands as perhaps the ultimate expression of this ancient wisdom, a monument to humanity's enduring quest to shape not just our physical world, but our experience of reality itself. While the Great Pyramid stands as a masterpiece of early acoustic engineering, the Romans achieved something equally profound but distinctly different with the Pantheon, a structure that doesn't just eliminate sound but choreographs it, transforming noise into a component of the sacred experience itself. Stepping inside is like entering a colossal ear turned toward the heavens. The most immediate feature is, of course, the oculus, that breathtaking 9-meter opening at the dome's apex, a window to the sky that seems to defy the very laws of architecture. But this opening is far more than a dramatic skylight. It is the heart of the Pantheon's acoustic character. While one might expect an open hole to let in a cacophony of city noise, the opposite occurs. The dome's immense scale and the oculus's specific placement work together to create a vertical sound path. External sounds from the streets of Rome enter, but are immediately drawn upward and dissipated into the vast volume of the dome, losing their intensity and meaning before they can ever reach the ears of those below. This leaves the interior remarkably insulated from the urban clamor, a silent sanctuary floating serenely above the bustling city. This manipulation of sound continues with the brilliant engineering of the coffered ceiling. Those 5 rows of 28 sunken panels are not merely decorative. They are a sophisticated acoustic damping system carved directly into the concrete. Each coffer acts as a small, sound-diffusing cavity, breaking up the smooth concave surface that would otherwise act like a perfect parabolic mirror for sound, focusing and amplifying echoes into a chaotic mess. Instead, whispers and footsteps are fractured into countless tiny reflections that cancel each other out, preventing any single echo from building into a disruptive force. This design achieves a delicate acoustic balance. The space is live enough to feel connected and atmospheric, yet dead enough to maintain a reverent hush. It encourages a natural lowering of the voice, a collective, unspoken agreement among visitors to honor the quiet grandeur of the space, just as the ancient Romans would have during rituals dedicated to the planetary gods. The genius of the Pantheon's design lies in this seamless fusion of the symbolic and the scientific. The oculus, forever tracking the sun, moon, and stars, literally brings the cosmos into the temple, aligning the space with the divine order of the universe. The sound being drawn upward through this opening completes a powerful sensory metaphor. Human whispers and prayers are symbolically offered up to the gods, while divine light and favor pour down in return. The marble floor, subtly convex to channel away rainwater, also plays a subtle role in this acoustic dance, gently dispersing sound across its surface rather than allowing it to pool in the center. Every element, the specific blend of concrete aggregates in the dome for optimal density and mass, the precise curvature of every surface, the strategic placement of niches and altars, was calculated to create an environment that feels both overwhelmingly majestic and intimately personal. It is a space that doesn't silence the individual but connects them to something immense through the very quality of the quiet it produces. The Pantheon stands as a testament to Roman architectural philosophy, where beauty was never without purpose, and the experience of the divine was engineered into the very physics of the place. Leaving the grand imperial scale of Roman architecture behind, we journey now to a different approach to sacred silence, one carved not from assembled stone, but directly into the living heart of the earth itself. The rock-cut temple caves of Ajanta and Ellora in India represent an architectural philosophy of profound subtraction, where silence wasn't built up but meticulously excavated. Here, architects worked in reverse, starting with a solid mountain of basalt and carefully removing everything that was not temple, not pathway, not sacred space. This process inherently created an environment of immense acoustic isolation. The sheer mass of the rock surrounding these chambers, often dozens of meters thick on all sides, provides a natural soundproofing that is virtually impossible to achieve in any free-standing structure. The moment you step from the bright, noisy Indian landscape into the cool, shadowy interior of one of these caves, the outside world doesn't just fade away. It is completely severed, replaced by a stillness that feels ancient and absolute. The journey through these temples is a masterfully designed sensory and spiritual progression, an architectural metaphor for the path to enlightenment. You begin in the wider, more open mandapa or hall, which might have once been filled with the soft murmurs of congregants and the occasional chant. The ceilings here are often high and adorned with intricate carvings of deities and celestial beings, a visual representation of the divine world one is approaching. The acoustics in these outer halls are slightly more live, allowing for collective ritual sounds, but the thick rock walls ensure no echo ever becomes disruptive. From here, you are funneled through a narrow, often dimly lit antarolla or vestibule. This passageway is both a physical and psychological threshold. Its constrained space forces a natural quietness upon you. Conversation drops to a whisper, and the focus turns inward. The architecture itself is guiding your behavior, preparing you for what lies ahead. This culminates in the final destination, the Garbhagriha, the womb chamber. This innermost sanctum is typically a small, square, and completely unadorned room, housing only the essential representation of the divine, such as a Shiva lingam or a statue of the Buddha. The acoustic shift here is dramatic. The combination of the small volume of the room, the specific resonant qualities of the basalt, and its deep burial within the mountain creates a phenomenon known as an acoustically dead room. All sound frequencies, from the lowest hum to the highest whisper, are absorbed almost instantly by the dense, porous stone. The effect is not one of emptiness, but of profound fullness, a palpable, pressurized silence that feels like a physical presence. In this space, your own breath becomes the loudest thing you can hear, and the internal chatter of the mind has nowhere to hide. The architecture has successfully externalized the inner goal of meditation, the achievement of perfect, undistracted focus. This carefully orchestrated acoustic journey mirrors the core principles of Hindu and Buddhist spiritual practice with incredible fidelity. The path from the outer hall to the inner womb chamber is a direct architectural parallel to the yogic concept of pratyahara, the withdrawal of the senses from the external world. The noisy distractions of everyday life are symbolically and literally left behind at the entrance. The narrow passage represents the focused discipline of concentration, dharana, where awareness is channeled toward a single point. Finally, the utter silence of the Garbhagriha facilitates dhyana, or deep meditation, where the self dissolves into the object of contemplation. The temple doesn't just house worship, it actively architects the worshipper's consciousness, using the powerful tool of enforced silence to guide them step by step toward a state of divine connection. In these caves, the mountain itself becomes a silent teacher, and the act of moving through its carved spaces becomes a profound lesson in the power of quietude. This profound quiet was never merely an acoustic accident or a simple byproduct of thick walls. It was a carefully cultivated symbol, a language in its own right that spoke directly to the human spirit. Across cultures and continents, silence within sacred architecture consistently represented concepts too vast for words: purity, eternity, and the utterly ineffable nature of the divine. In the soaring Gothic cathedrals of medieval Europe, for instance, the most silent areas were often the side chapels and the spaces behind the high altar. These weren't just acoustically isolated corners, they were physical manifestations of the Christian belief in a God whose full presence is ultimately a mystery, a profound truth that human language could never adequately capture. The silence in these spaces wasn't empty. It was full of this mystery, encouraging worshippers to move beyond recited prayers and into a state of wordless awe and personal communion. We find a parallel yet culturally distinct symbolism in the stepped pyramids and ceremonial plazas of the ancient Maya. For them, communication with deified ancestors and the gods of the underworld was a central part of their spiritual practice. This communication, however, wasn't a public spectacle. Specific chambers and secluded platforms atop their towering temples were designed as acoustically silent zones, reserved strictly for the priests. The silence here symbolized a sacred telephone line to the other side, a clear channel free from the static of the living world. It represented a threshold where the veil between worlds was thinnest, and only in utter quiet could the whispers of the ancestors be heard and the will of the gods be properly interpreted. This shows us that while the symbolic meaning of silence could vary from divine mystery to ancestral connection, its importance as a spiritual medium was a universal architectural principle. This symbolic language extended far beyond the mere absence of sound, and was physically encoded into the very design elements of these spaces. Architects used visual cues to reinforce the experience and meaning of silence. An empty niche in a Buddhist cave temple wasn't an unfinished project. It was a deliberate representation of sunyata, or emptiness, the fertile void from which all potential arises. A perfectly plain, unadorned wall in a Cistercian monastery wasn't a sign of poverty. It was a tool to eliminate visual noise and distraction, directing the gaze and the mind inward toward contemplation. Even the use of unobstructed sightlines, like the long, clear view down the nave of a cathedral toward the altar, served a dual purpose. It created a visual path for focus while also establishing an acoustic pathway where sound could be carefully managed, ensuring that any noise generated was intentional, like a chant or a hymn, and not the disruptive chatter of everyday life. These design choices all emphasized void over fullness, stillness over activity, and inner experience over external discourse. By decoding this architectural symbolism, we uncover a fascinating truth. silence functioned as a complete non-verbal language of spirituality. It was a language that everyone, regardless of literacy or social status, could understand. In a world where sacred texts were often locked away and accessible only to an educated elite, the experience of architectural silence was a democratizing spiritual force. A peasant entering a cathedral and a scholar entering a library might have different intellectual understandings of God, but they could share the same visceral, humbling experience of a silence so deep it felt divine. This silent language spoke volumes through its very absence, using the quiet to convey concepts of infinity, peace, and transcendence that words could only point toward but never fully encompass. The architecture itself became a teacher, guiding individuals toward a state of being where listening to the divine, to the universe, or to their own inner truth became more important than speaking. This meticulous selection of building materials reveals a sophisticated understanding of acoustics that functioned like a hidden layer of spiritual technology. Ancient architects acted as masters of sonic alchemy, intuitively knowing which stones would sing and which would stay silent, transforming raw geological matter into vessels of profound quiet. In Egypt, this knowledge was applied with incredible precision. The massive temple complexes weren't just built from whatever stone was nearby. They were constructed with a deliberate acoustic journey in mind. The outer courts and pylons, meant to impress and handle crowds, were often made of relatively resonant sandstone. But as one moved deeper toward the Holy of Holies, the sanctuary where only the high priest could enter, the materials shifted dramatically to dense, igneous rock like granite or basalt. This wasn't merely a display of wealth or power, it was a functional acoustic filter. The crystalline structure of granite is exceptionally effective at absorbing sound energy, particularly the lower frequencies of human speech and movement. Walking from the bright, echoey sandstone halls into the cool, dark granite sanctum would have been a palpable sensory experience. The outside world, both visually and sonically, was literally and metaphorically left behind, replaced by an overwhelming silence that signaled the presence of the divine. This principle of material intelligence extended across the ancient world. Greek architects, particularly those building sanctuaries dedicated to mystery cults or oracular deities, frequently selected a specific type of porous limestone. Unlike the hard, reflective marble used for statues and decorative elements that could carry a beautiful tone, this softer, more cavernous stone acted like a natural sponge for sound waves. In the Telesterion at Eleusis, where initiates experienced the sacred rites of Demeter and Persephone, the walls were constructed of this material precisely to prevent echoes from bouncing around and disrupting the deeply personal, secretive ceremonies. The very stone was chosen to protect the mystery, ensuring that whispers remained whispers and the profound silences between rituals remained absolute. This shows a nuanced understanding that went beyond simply blocking all sound. It was about controlling it, about creating an environment where certain sacred sounds could be made intentionally, while all other accidental noise was efficiently swallowed by the architecture itself. Perhaps most fascinating are the ingenious, low-tech solutions that prefigure modern soundproofing techniques. At various sites, from Neolithic passage tombs in Europe to ceremonial platforms in the Americas, archaeologists have found evidence of builders using layered insulation within walls. At the ancient Irish site of Newgrange, for instance, the builders packed a mixture of clay and crushed seashells between the outer retaining wall and the inner passageway stones. This combination created a dense, dampening barrier that effectively decoupled the inner chamber from the outside environment, isolating it from both the sound of wind and rain and the activities of the outside world. Similarly, in some Mesoamerican structures, excavators have found cavities within walls filled with straw, sand, or even loose gravel, primitive but highly effective sound-deadening fills that would break up sound vibrations through friction and absorb their energy before it could transmit through the stone. These weren't crude experiments. They were applied solutions born from centuries of observation and practical knowledge about how to manipulate the physical environment to serve a spiritual need. What emerges from this examination of materials is a crucial correction to a modern misconception. We often romanticize ancient sacred spaces as being purely symbolic or mystical in their design. But the choice of granite over sandstone or the decision to pack a wall with clay reveals a deeply pragmatic, almost engineering-minded approach to achieving a spiritual goal. The symbolic meaning of silence, its connection to the primordial void, to the presence of the divine, to the inner self, could not be realized without the functional reality of silence. The architects understood that a worshipper could not achieve a state of inner quiet if they were distracted by the murmur of the crowd outside or the echo of their own sandals on the floor. Therefore, the symbolic and the functional were not separate concerns. They were two sides of the same sacred coin. The granite was both a symbol of eternity and a superb acoustic insulator. The layered wall was both a structural necessity and a sophisticated noise cancellation device. This harmony between profound meaning and practical physics is what makes these ancient blueprints of silence so enduringly brilliant, demonstrating that the path to the divine was built with both a reverent heart and a brilliantly practical mind. Moving from the tangible properties of stone and mortar, we enter a more abstract yet equally powerful dimension of ancient design, the world of sacred geometry. This wasn't merely about creating shapes that were pleasing to the eye. It was about harnessing the inherent mathematical order of the universe to shape the very quality of the air within a space. The architects understood that form and function were inseparable, and that the precise angles and ratios they employed would directly dictate how sound behaved. A perfectly square room, for instance, might seem like a simple, stable design, but to an acoustic expert, it's a potential nightmare. Parallel walls create a phenomenon known as standing waves, where sound energy bounces back and forth between the surfaces, amplifying certain frequencies and creating disruptive, lingering echoes that can make quiet contemplation impossible. The ancient builders consistently avoided this pitfall, demonstrating an intuitive or perhaps calculated grasp of wave physics that is only now being fully measured with modern technology. This is where we see the genius of circular and curved designs come into play. Structures like Stonehenge on the Salisbury Plain or the vast expanse of the Roman Colosseum weren't just iconic for their scale, they were acoustic marvels of their time. The circular form is nature's ultimate sound diffuser. Unlike flat walls that reflect sound directly back to its source, a curved surface fractures sound waves, scattering them in countless directions. This dramatically reduces the intensity of any single reflection and eliminates sharp focal points where noise could concentrate and become overwhelming. In a space like the Colosseum, this diffusion was crucial. While the roar of the crowd was part of the spectacle, the design ensured that the sound of the combat below, the clash of swords, the commands of the organizers, could be heard clearly throughout the seating areas without degenerating into an indecipherable cacophony. The geometry managed the soundscape, allowing for both explosive noise and pockets of relative quiet, but the application of geometry went far beyond simple circles. The most revered ratio in ancient architecture, the golden ratio, often denoted by the Greek letter phi, approximately 1.618, appears repeatedly in the most acoustically successful spaces. This proportion, found in natural patterns from nautilus shells to spiral galaxies, was believed to represent perfect harmony and beauty. When applied to room dimensions, for example, making the length 1.618 times the width, architects discovered it naturally minimized the buildup of those problematic standing waves. The irregular relationship between the wall dimensions prevented sound waves from reinforcing each other, leading to a much smoother, more evenly damped acoustic environment. This mathematical intentionality is found in the floor plans of Egyptian temples, the layouts of Greek megarons, and the nave dimensions of early Christian basilicas, suggesting a widely shared architectural secret for cultivating silence. Perhaps the most sophisticated use of geometry is found in the complex curves of vaults and domes. We already touched on the Pantheon's magnificent dome, but the principle extends to countless other structures. The parabolic curve of a vaulted ceiling, for instance, doesn't just allow for greater height and grandeur. It acts as a sound guide, channeling noise along specific paths away from the congregation below. In many Byzantine churches, the intricate geometry of pendentives and apses, the curved triangular segments that support a dome, were designed to break up sound energy in much the same way a modern anechoic chamber uses angled foam wedges. The sound waves would travel upward, get fractured by these complex surfaces, and lose their energy before being reflected back down in a disruptive manner. This created a serene auditory atmosphere where the chanting of priests could be heard with clarity and reverence, floating in a space that felt both immense and intimately quiet. What makes this blending of geometric design and acoustic intention so profound is that it represents a complete synthesis of the spiritual and the scientific. For these ancient cultures, mathematics was not a cold, separate discipline. It was the sacred language through which the cosmos was ordered. By building according to these divine proportions, they weren't just solving an acoustic problem, they were aligning their earthly constructions with the harmonic principles of the universe itself. The resulting silence within these spaces wasn't just an absence of noise, it was the audible presence of cosmic order. It was a silence that felt right, that felt natural and innate, because it was built upon the same foundational ratios that govern patterns in nature. This deep alignment meant that a worshipper didn't just hear silence, they felt it in their bones as a resonance with the fundamental structure of reality, a quiet testament to the ancient belief that true sacredness is found in the perfect, harmonious balance of all things. This architectural choreography of silence finds its ultimate purpose in the rituals and ceremonies that brought these spaces to life. Imagine the scene during a high offering in an Egyptian temple. The public festivities, the chanting, the processional music, all of this would have occurred in the outer courtyards. But the critical moment, the actual presentation of the offering to the god's statue in the inner sanctum, was an act performed in utter solitude and silence by the high priest alone. This wasn't just a matter of tradition, it was a theological necessity. The belief was that the deity's spirit would temporarily inhabit the statue, and this delicate communion could only occur in an environment of perfect ritual purity, a state that included acoustic purity. Any stray sound, a cough, a footstep, even the rustle of clothing, was considered a potential pollutant, a profane intrusion that could break the connection and anger the god. The massively thick walls, the labyrinthine approach, and the strategic use of sound-absorbing materials were all engineered to create a perfect vacuum of noise for this precise, fragile moment of contact between the human and the divine. This principle of using architectural silence to safeguard sacred moments was a global phenomenon. We see it with extraordinary clarity in the Greek Eleusinian mysteries, one of the most important religious rites of the ancient world. For over 1,000 years, initiates underwent a profound transformative experience dedicated to the goddesses Demeter and Persephone. A crucial part of this multi-day ceremony involved a solemn procession along the sacred way from Athens to Eleusis. This path wasn't a simple road, it was a carefully designed ritual corridor. As initiates moved further from the city, the natural environment and the architecture worked in tandem to gradually strip away the distractions of ordinary life. They would pass through specially constructed gateways and narrow passageways that physically forced them into single file, naturally curtailing conversation and encouraging inward focus. By the time they entered the telesterion, the great hall of initiation, they had been acoustically and psychologically prepared for the vows of secrecy and the powerful silent revelations that were to follow. The architecture didn't just host the ritual, it actively conducted the participants into the necessary state of awed, receptive quiet. This deep intertwining of built environment and ritual practice reveals a sophisticated understanding of human psychology. The ancient priests and architects were, in effect, early masters of designing for peak experience. They intuitively knew that profound spiritual moments require a complete immersion, a total absorption that is impossible to achieve when the brain is processing external distractions. The silent, isolated chamber was the tool they used to induce this state of focused transcendence. It forced the participants' awareness away from the outside world and toward the internal landscape of symbol, emotion, and belief. The hushed atmosphere amplified the significance of every sanctioned sound: the strike of a match, the pouring of a libation, a single spoken word from the priest. These sounds, occurring within the curated silence, became incredibly potent, carrying a weight and meaning they would never have in a noisy environment. Furthermore, this ritual use of silence often served as a powerful social and educational marker. In many traditions, the right to experience deep architectural silence was earned. New initiates might participate in ceremonies in the louder, more communal outer halls. Only after years of training and purification would they be permitted to enter the innermost, most silent sanctums. The architecture itself taught a hierarchy of spiritual advancement, where greater quiet corresponded to a closer proximity to the divine mystery. The experience of that profound silence became a reward and a testament to one's progress on the spiritual path. It was a physical sensation that reinforced theological concepts, teaching through the body what words alone could not fully convey, that the ultimate truths are not shouted, but whispered in a language that can only be heard when everything else has fallen away. The silent stone became the most eloquent teacher of all. This fascinating divergence in how cultures architect silence becomes strikingly clear when we place a soaring Gothic cathedral next to a serene Taoist temple. In the West, particularly within the Christian tradition that gave us those incredible Gothic structures, silence was often framed in a context of hierarchy and awe. The design goal was to make the individual feel small in the presence of an immense, omnipotent God. Walking into a place like Chartres Cathedral or Notre Dame, your eyes are forced upward along impossibly high-ribbed vaults toward heaven, and the sheer scale of the space creates a natural, involuntary hush. The silence here isn't cozy or personal, it's majestic and imposing. It's the silence of a throne room demanding reverence and humility. You lower your voice not just out of respect, but because the architecture itself seems to swallow your words, reminding you of your own insignificance in the grand divine order. This silence emphasizes a fundamental separation between the human and the divine, a gap that can only be bridged through worship and awe. Journey to the east, and you encounter a philosophy of silence that is less about hierarchy and more about harmony. In Chinese Taoist thought, silence isn't the absence of sound waiting to be filled by a divine voice, but a positive state of emptiness known as wu, a fertile void that is the source of all potential and creativity. This isn't a silence that overwhelms, it's a silence that invites you in. Taoist temple architecture reflects this perfectly. Instead of building upward to overwhelm the senses, these temples often spread out horizontally, blending into the natural landscape. They employ a series of walls and moon gates to sequentially separate the visitor from the noise of the everyday world. Within the complex, you'll find carefully composed gardens with trickling water features and rustling bamboo. This is a critical distinction. Rather than trying to eliminate all sound, the architects intentionally introduced controlled, soothing natural sounds to mask the unpredictable noise of the outside world. The gentle babble of a stream isn't a disruption. It's a tool that defines and enhances the surrounding silence, making it deeper and more focused. The silence here is an active participant in mindfulness, a medium for aligning the self with the effortless flow of the Tao, or the way of the universe. This contrast in fundamental purpose led to dramatically different architectural solutions. The Gothic cathedral achieves its silence through mass and monumentality. Flying buttresses allow for thinner walls filled with stained glass, but the immense volume of the interior space naturally deadens sound and creates a reverberant, ethereal atmosphere. The focus is on the vertical axis, pulling the soul heavenward. Eastern traditions, like those found in Zen Buddhist temples in Japan, often achieve silence through minimalism and precision. The use of raw, natural materials like wood and paper creates spaces that are acoustically absorbent. The famous rock gardens, like the one at Ryonjai, use raked gravel not just as a visual metaphor for water, but as an acoustic surface that crunches underfoot, a deliberate sound that makes the visitor hyper-aware of their own movement and presence, anchoring them in the now. The focus is inward on the horizontal plane of the self. Yet, for all their differences in method and meaning, both of these profound architectural traditions arrived at the same essential conclusion: that a deep, cultivated silence is a non-negotiable prerequisite for transcendent experience. Whether the goal was to commune with a transcendent God or to realize the divine within oneself, the chaotic noise of ordinary life had to be architecturally mediated. The Gothic cathedral used its scale to drown out the world, while the Taoist temple used its landscaping to gently ease the world away. One inspires awe through grandeur, the other peace through integration. This beautiful dichotomy shows us that there is no single blueprint for silence. Instead, these ancient cultures listened to their own spiritual hearts and built accordingly, giving us a rich, global heritage of quiet spaces that continue to offer respite, reflection, and a much-needed connection to something greater than the daily grind. This deep understanding of architectural acoustics reveals a crucial truth: the ancients were not just builders, but brilliant environmental psychologists who knew that the most profound silence often begins by listening to the land itself. Rather than fighting against their surroundings, they practiced a form of sacred acoustical ecology, carefully selecting sites where nature itself provided the foundational quiet they sought. The desert, for instance, was not chosen for temple construction merely because it was barren or symbolically pure. Its very nature as an acoustic environment made it ideal. The vast, flat stretches of sand and the still, dry air of places like the Egyptian Sahara naturally absorb sound waves. High-frequency noises, the chirp of a bird, the rustle of leaves, even the sound of a human voice travel only short distances before being swallowed by the terrain and the atmosphere. By placing their most sacred complexes in these deserts, architects started with a natural canvas of profound quiet, requiring far less intervention to achieve the deep silence necessary for communion with the gods. The environment became the first and most important wall of the temple. We see this principle of leveraging natural acoustics masterfully applied in the rock-cut city of Petra. Here, the Nabateans didn't construct their monuments, they revealed them, carving breathtaking facades like the famous treasury, and the monastery directly into the rose-red sandstone cliffs. This construction method provided an inherent and powerful form of soundproofing. The living rock, often dozens of meters thick behind these structures, acts as a massive acoustic barrier, completely insulating the interior spaces from the outside world. The cliff faces themselves also play a role, reflecting and diffusing any ambient noise from the canyon below. Walking into the dim, cool interior of the monastery, having trekked through the bustling sick, is an experience of immediate and absolute auditory separation. The raucous calls of merchants and guides fade into nothing, replaced by a stillness that feels as ancient and solid as the mountain itself. The architects used the geology not just as a building material, but as a pre-engineered acoustic chamber. Elevation was another powerful tool in this ancient toolkit for silence. The Greeks were particularly adept at this, consistently building their most important sanctuaries on remote mountainsides or elevated acropolises. The Temple of Apollo at Delphi is a perfect example, perched high on the slopes of Mount Parnassus. This placement served multiple purposes. Symbolically, it brought the temple closer to the gods of Olympus. Practically, the elevation created a natural buffer zone of silence. The climb itself was a form of acoustic and psychological preparation, leaving the noise and concerns of the city in the plain far below. The thin mountain air, often moving in gentle but constant winds, also has a dampening effect on sound, preventing it from carrying clearly over long distances. The resulting soundscape at the sanctuary was not one of dead silence, but of filtered, natural sounds. The sigh of the wind through the olive trees, the distant cry of an eagle, that enhanced rather than disrupted the contemplative atmosphere. The site itself curated the auditory experience. Perhaps most ingeniously, ancient designers didn't always seek to eliminate all sound. Sometimes they orchestrated it. They understood that a completely anechoic, utterly dead space could be as disorienting as a noisy one. Instead, they incorporated specific natural features to provide a constant, soothing auditory backdrop, a technique modern acoustic engineers call masking. This is where the gentle trickle of a spring or the guided rush of wind through a specially designed channel becomes part of the architectural plan. In the ancient city of Palenque, Mayan engineers channeled a mountain stream directly through the ceremonial precinct. The sound of flowing water served a dual purpose. It provided a spiritually significant symbol of life and purification, while its constant, gentle white noise effectively masked less predictable and more disruptive sounds like distant conversations, footsteps, or animal calls. This created a stable, predictable acoustic environment where the only sounds that stood out were the intentional ones of the ritual itself. This seamless integration of the built and natural environments points to a profound ecological mindfulness that we are only now fully appreciating. These were not structures imposed upon the landscape, they were dialogues with it. The architects were master listeners, attuned to the sonic personality of a place. The way sound traveled across a valley, how it was absorbed by a forest or reflected by a canyon wall. They chose their sites not just for strategic defense or access to water, but for their inherent acoustic virtues. This holistic approach resulted in sacred spaces that feel innately right, places where the silence doesn't feel manufactured or forced, but organic and eternal. It represents a lost art of design, one that sought harmony with the environment in every dimension: visual, spiritual, and auditory, creating sanctuaries of silence that were gifts from the earth itself, respectfully enhanced by human hands. For centuries, the astonishing acoustic properties of ancient structures were often dismissed as fortunate accidents or the simple byproduct of massive stone construction, a happy coincidence rather than deliberate design. But the advent of sophisticated modern technology has given us a powerful new set of ears with which to listen to the past, and what we're hearing is forcing a complete rewrite of architectural history. Scientists and archaeologists are now employing tools like impulse response measurement, which uses a brief, sharp sound to map how acoustics behave in a space, and detailed 3D laser scanning to create perfect digital replicas of these sites. When they run acoustic simulations on these virtual models, they can isolate and analyze the sonic properties with a precision that was previously impossible, removing centuries of weathering and modern contamination to hear the space as it was originally intended. The results are unequivocal. The silence and specific sound effects found in these sacred sites are not random. They are the clear signature of intentional acoustic engineering. Some of the most compelling evidence comes from the subterranean world of the Hal-Saflieni hypogeum on Malta, a labyrinthine burial complex carved from solid limestone over 5,000 years ago. Within a specific chamber now known as the Oracle Room, scientists discovered something extraordinary. The room resonates at a frequency of 110 Hz, a low hum that falls right within the baritone range of the human voice. This isn't a subtle effect. When a man speaks at this pitch, his voice is dramatically amplified and distorted, vibrating through the chamber and the very bones of the listeners. Neuroscientists have since studied this specific frequency and found that exposure to 110 Hz can significantly alter brain activity, reducing activity in the language centers of the left hemisphere and increasing activity in the right hemisphere, which is associated with spatial perception, emotion, and creativity. This shift is associated with the mental state required for meditation and can lower cortisol levels, reducing stress and potentially facilitating trance-like states. The ancient builders likely discovered this phenomenon through trial and error, then refined the chamber's dimensions to harness it, effectively turning the architecture itself into a tool for psychological and spiritual transformation. Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, technology is revealing another layer of acoustic genius. In 2015, archaeologists studying the Mayan pyramid of Kukulkan at Chichen Itza used electrical resistivity tomography, a non-invasive technique similar to an ultrasound for structures, to peer inside the massive monument. To their astonishment, they discovered a second, smaller pyramid hidden deep within the outer shell, and beneath that, a hidden water-filled sinkhole or cenote. This discovery solved a long-standing acoustic mystery. The main staircase of the pyramid has a famous auditory quirk. If you clap your hands directly in front of it, the echo that returns doesn't sound like a hand clap at all, but perfectly mimics the chirp of the sacred Quetzal bird. Researchers now believe the hidden internal chambers and the cavernous cenote below act as a series of nested Helmholtz resonators, sophisticated sound filters that take the broad frequency of the clap and shape it, amplifying certain harmonics and dampening others to produce that specific avian chirp. This was no parlor trick. It was a deliberate sonic symbol, a way for the architecture to literally give voice to the spiritual world and manifest the presence of a sacred animal through the science of sound. These scientific validations are fundamentally changing our perception of pre-modern builders. We can no longer view them as primitive artisans simply piling stones upon stones. They were keen observers of natural phenomena and brilliant experimental physicists who understood the behavior of sound waves on an intuitive, practical level. They knew that a curved wall would diffuse noise while a flat one would create a disruptive echo. They understood that dense granite would swallow sound while certain types of limestone could carry a whisper for dozens of meters. They mastered geometry not just for visual symmetry, but to prevent standing waves that would make their sacred chambers acoustically chaotic. This was a technology of experience, refined over generations and encoded into their architectural traditions, passed down from master to apprentice just as surely as the techniques for fitting a joint or lifting a lintel. As each new study is published, we are gaining a profound appreciation for the holistic genius of these ancient cultures. They did not separate science from spirituality, acoustics from awe, or engineering from emotion. For them, a successful sacred space had to work on every level. It had to be astronomically aligned, structurally sound, visually magnificent, and acoustically perfect. The deliberate creation of silence or specific sound effects was the final, crucial ingredient in this multisensory recipe for transcendence. It was the tool that transformed a grand building from a passive backdrop for ritual into an active participant in it, an environment that could guide consciousness, embody the divine, and speak in a language of echoes and quiet that resonated deep within the human soul. It's one thing to appreciate the spiritual symbolism of these silent spaces, but modern neuroscience now offers us a stunning biological explanation for why they feel so transformative, why stepping into that profound quiet can feel like a weight being lifted from your shoulders. When we are surrounded by constant noise, our brains are engaged in a relentless, often subconscious process called auditory filtering. Our neural pathways are constantly working to sort through the cacophony, the distant traffic, the hum of electronics, the snippets of conversation, deciding what to pay attention to and what to ignore. This cognitive load is exhausting. It elevates stress hormones like cortisol, keeps our nervous system on a low level of alert, and fragments our focus. But when we enter an environment of true, engineered silence, that filtering mechanism can finally stand down. The cognitive burden vanishes. Almost immediately, brain scans show a shift in activity from the prefrontal cortex, associated with constant processing and problem solving, toward more integrated states involving the default mode network, which is linked to introspection, memory consolidation, and a sense of self. This isn't just feeling relaxed, it's a fundamental neurological shift into a state of relaxed alertness, where the mind is both calm and incredibly receptive. This shift has measurable, powerful effects on our well-being. Studies have shown that periods of sustained silence can stimulate neurogenesis, the creation of new neurons, in the hippocampus, a region of the brain crucial for learning and memory. It's as if the brain, freed from the task of processing external noise, turns its resources inward to repair, reorganize, and strengthen its own connections. Furthermore, this quiet state allows for a process called divergent thinking, where the mind can make novel connections between seemingly unrelated ideas. This is the neurological basis of insight, creativity, and that aha moment of sudden understanding. For an ancient worshipper, this would have translated perfectly into the spiritual goals of their visit, a clarity of thought that allowed for deeper contemplation of sacred texts, an emotional openness that made prayer feel more genuine and connected, and a profound sense of peace that felt like tangible evidence of the divine presence. They didn't have fMRI machines to prove it, but they knew intuitively that the environment was working on them, changing them from the inside out. This is where the genius of the ancient architects becomes even more profound. They weren't just building silent spaces, they were building therapeutic environments, carefully crafted to induce specific, beneficial states of consciousness. They were, in effect, practicing a form of prehistoric neuroscience, using architecture as their tool. By designing structures that minimized disruptive echoes and blocked external chaos, they were directly reducing the cognitive load on the visitor's brain. They were creating the ideal conditions for the nervous system to regulate itself, for stress to melt away, and for the mind to achieve a lucidity that was likely rare in the noisy, demanding world of ancient daily life. The emotional resonance people felt in these places, the overwhelming awe, the deep comfort, the sense of connection wasn't just a poetic reaction. It was a direct biological and psychological response to an environment perfectly tailored to support mental and spiritual well-being. This ancient understanding of silence as a therapeutic tool finds a powerful echo in some of the most cutting-edge mental health practices today. Therapists now use periods of silent meditation to help patients with anxiety disorders learn to regulate their emotions. Schools are experimenting with quiet rooms to help students with attention deficits improve their focus. The entire wellness industry is built on the modern rediscovery of what these ancient cultures knew all along. That intentional quiet is not a luxury, but a necessity for human health. The sacred spaces of the past were perhaps humanity's first and most ambitious mental health sanctuaries, offering a respite for the soul that was grounded in a deep, albeit intuitive, understanding of how our brains work. Their enduring power lies in this timeless truth. By architecting silence, they were ultimately architecting peace of mind, creating a haven where the human spirit could find its way back to its own quiet, resilient core. This carefully orchestrated access to silence reveals a profound and often overlooked dimension of these ancient spaces. They were powerful instruments of social engineering. The architecture did more than just facilitate spirituality. It physically mapped the social and spiritual hierarchy onto the very ground plan of the temple or complex. In ancient Egypt, this segregation was explicit and absolute. A typical temple complex was a series of ever more restricted courtyards and halls, each separated by massive pylons, gateways. The general public, bustling with activity and noise, might only ever access the vast outer court. Here, during festivals, the air would have been filled with the sounds of commerce, celebration, and communal prayer, a vital and noisy part of religious life. But as one moved inward, the spaces narrowed, the ceilings lowered, the light dimmed, and the materials shifted to denser, more sound-absorbing stone. This progression was a sensory journey from the profane to the sacred, from the communal to the exclusive, and crucially, from noise to silence. Only the highest-ranking priests and the pharaoh himself were permitted to cross the final threshold into the naos, the windowless, granite inner sanctum that housed the cult statue of the god. This was the epicenter of architectural silence, a place so quiet that a priest could hear his own heartbeat. This exclusivity served a dual purpose. Theologically, it protected the purity of the god's dwelling place from the chaos of the outside world, but politically, it cemented the priestly class's authority. They alone could enter the presence of the deity. They alone could interpret the divine will in that perfect quiet. Their privileged access to silence became the foundation of their power, a power that was made tangible and unquestionable every time a commoner was stopped at a gate, hearing the echoes of their own world fade away while the silent mystery remained hidden and guarded within. This pattern of using acoustic segregation to enforce social order appears with striking similarity on the other side of the world, in the grand ball courts of Mesoamerican cities like Chichen Itza or Monte Alban. The ball game itself was a loud, violent, and public spectacle. The thunderous impact of a solid rubber ball, the roar of the crowd, the clash of protective gear. The playing alley was a canyon of noise, however, positioned high above the court, often on ornate stone platforms, were restricted viewing areas for the ruling elite and the high priests. These platforms, through their strategic placement and sometimes their architectural design, existed in a relative acoustic bubble. The design likely dampened the roar from below, creating a zone of privileged quiet from which the elite could serenely observe the ritual contest. Their physical elevation was mirrored by their acoustic elevation. They were literally above the noise of the common struggle. This silent observation was not passive, it was a performance of power. Their calm, quiet presence amidst the chaos demonstrated their removed, superior status and their role as the ultimate arbiters of a game that often ended in profound spiritual consequences, including ritual sacrifice. This control over silence transformed it from a simple environmental condition into a potent political commodity. In a world where most of life was lived publicly and noisily, controlled silence was a rare and valuable resource. The ability to grant or deny access to it was a fundamental mechanism of control. By restricting the deepest silence to a chosen few, the ruling classes created a tangible, experiential distinction between themselves and everyone else. It was a sensory proof of their claimed closer connection to the divine and their inherent right to rule. The architecture itself became a silent enforcer of this order, its walls and gates acting as unarguable barriers that everyone understood and obeyed. This demonstrates that the blueprint of silence was never just a spiritual document. It was also a political blueprint, carefully drafted to ensure that the profound power of quiet remained in the hands of those who already held the reins of earthly power, using the absence of sound to speak volumes about who mattered in society and who did not. This masterful fusion of sight and sound, or rather, the absence of sound, reveals an ancient understanding of human perception that feels almost modern in its sophistication. The architects of these sacred spaces knew that our senses do not operate in isolation. They work in concert, each one capable of heightening or diminishing the others. In the profound quiet of a temple's inner sanctum, even the smallest visual stimulus becomes magnified, charged with meaning. A single sliver of light is no longer just illumination. In that context of deep silence, it becomes a tangible manifestation of the divine, a beam of pure presence cutting through the darkness. This multisensory design was a deliberate strategy to orchestrate awe, to create an environment so powerful and immersive that it could shift a person's entire state of consciousness, guiding them from the mundane into the realm of the spiritual. We see this principle executed with breathtaking elegance in the Pantheon. That iconic oculus is far more than a structural or lighting feature. It is the heart of the building's spiritual mechanism. The beam of sunlight it emits doesn't just light the room, it choreographs it. Throughout the day, this shaft of light travels slowly across the coffered dome and down the marble walls, acting as a colossal, silent sundial that connects the earthly interior to the cosmic cycles above. But it's the interaction with the space's profound acoustic quiet that makes this spectacle truly transcendent. In a noisy environment, the moving light might be just a curiosity. But in the Pantheon's hushed atmosphere, where every footstep is muted and every whisper seems to be drawn upward and dissipated, the silent, slow-motion dance of light becomes a mesmerizing focal point. It invites quiet contemplation, pulling the viewer's attention away from the self and into a state of wordless wonder at the orderly, majestic passage of the heavens. The silence allows you to see time itself passing, making the infinite tangible in the here and now. This synergy was not a Roman invention, but a universal architectural language spoken by sacred builders across the ancient world. In the depths of the Great Pyramid, the journey to the king's chamber was a carefully staged sensory experience. After navigating the cramped, dark, and utterly silent ascending passages, a priest would emerge into the grandeur of the granite chamber. Here, the only light might come from a single oil lamp, its flicker reflecting off the highly polished stone walls and the massive sarcophagus. In the complete absence of echo or external noise, that small, dancing flame would have commanded absolute attention. Its light would have felt alive, a dynamic presence in the motionless, silent void. This wasn't just practical lighting, it was a tool for focus. The silence stripped away all distraction, allowing that solitary point of light to become a gateway for meditation, a visual anchor for the priest's consciousness as he performed rituals meant to guide the pharaoh's soul to the stars. The techniques varied by culture and climate, but the underlying goal remained the same: to use controlled light to deepen the experience of cultivated silence. In the rock-cut caves of India, where the silence was absolute and oppressive in its completeness, architects carved intricate, pierced stone screens called jollies into the cave entrances. These screens acted as natural filters, breaking the harsh outside sunlight into dozens of tiny, shimmering beams that played across the dark interior floors and walls. The effect was that of a celestial star field projected inside the cave. As a meditator sat in the profound quiet, their eyes would have these gentle points of moving light to rest upon, preventing the disorientation that can come from total sensory deprivation, while maintaining the deep auditory silence necessary for introspection. The light became a silent companion in the journey inward, a visual representation of the flickering of consciousness itself. This interplay between light and silence points to a profound psychological insight possessed by these ancient designers. They understood that true awe is a multisensory emotion. Silence alone can be unsettling or empty. Light alone can be merely pretty. But when you combine a controlled visual phenomenon with a curated auditory vacuum, you create something far greater than the sum of its parts, an environment that is actively transformative. The light gives the silence a form to contemplate, while the silence gives the light a sacred weight and meaning. Together, they orchestrate an experience that bypasses the analytical mind and speaks directly to the emotional and spiritual core, crafting a moment of connection that feels both profoundly personal and cosmically vast. In these spaces, the architecture itself becomes a silent guide, using the gentle language of light and shadow to lead the soul toward a glimpse of the eternal. Beyond the precise geometry and carefully chosen stones, the profound quiet of these ancient places sparked something else in the human imagination, a need to explain the unexplainable. When a space defies the natural laws of sound so completely, when a whisper simply vanishes against a wall that should echo, the mind reaches for myth. Folklore across the globe blossomed around these acoustic anomalies, weaving tales that attributed the silence not to human genius, but to divine intervention or otherworldly magic. These stories were far more than simple pre-scientific explanations. They were the cultural guardians of silence, ensuring that the sacredness of these spaces was preserved and passed down through generations in the most memorable way possible, through a compelling narrative. Consider the sacred groves of ancient Greece, places like the sanctuary of Dodona, where the rustling leaves of a great oak tree were believed to convey the will of Zeus. Woven into these traditions were tales of specific, hushed groves dedicated to nymphs and other nature deities. The myths described these spaces as possessing an unnatural quiet, where the normal sounds of the forest, the chirping of crickets, the call of birds, would fall away. In this curated silence, it was said that the nymphs would communicate not with voices, but through the gentle, almost imperceptible whisper of leaves brushing against one another, or the soft sigh of the wind through a particular stand of trees. This wasn't just a pretty story, it was a powerful piece of environmental ethics. By attributing the silence to the presence of divine beings, the myths effectively protected these groves from desecration. To cut down a tree or disrupt the quiet was not merely logging. It was an act of sacrilege against the nymphs themselves. The myth enforced the practice, preserving these natural pockets of silence for ritual and contemplation. On the other side of the world, among the myriad tribes of North America, similar stories emerged to explain the unique acoustics of the land. The Navajo speak of certain canyons where the wind behaves strangely, creating areas of profound stillness. Their legends tell that these are places where the holy people once walked, and the silence that remains is a lingering trace of their presence, a sacred void that absorbs careless sound out of respect. In the Pacific Northwest, tribes have stories of caves where echoes do not return. The tales explain that spirits residing within the rock absorb the sound, listening intently to the words of visitors to determine if they are worthy or pure of heart. A returned echo might be a sign of acceptance, while a swallowed sound could be a warning. These narratives served a crucial function. They encoded practical knowledge into a spiritual framework. A warning that a cave spirit would steal your voice was a far more effective way to prevent people from shouting, disrupting rituals, or venturing into potentially unstable caverns than a simple rule could ever be. The myth taught respect through awe. This process of mythologizing silence ensured the survival of architectural and cultural practices long after the original builder's precise technical knowledge might have faded. A master stonemason might know that a specific angle of wall deflects sound, but his grandson might only remember the family story that great-grandfather built that wall to keep the wind spirits out. The story, while not technically accurate, preserved the intentionality behind the design. It ensured that when repairs were made or new structures were built, the critical feature, the preservation of silence, was maintained because it was understood not as a construction technique, but as a sacred obligation. The myth became a vessel carrying the essential principle across centuries, protecting the acoustic integrity of the space long after the physics behind it were forgotten. By examining these myths, we see a universal human impulse to frame profound silence as something active and sentient, rather than passive and empty. Silence became a character in these stories, a listening presence, a judging entity, a divine gift. This personification elevated silence from a mere environmental condition to a sacred participant in the human experience. It underscored the idea that true silence was not a void to be filled, but a presence to be respected, a gateway to a realm where the normal rules of the world were suspended and the divine could make itself known. These legends are a testament to the deep, intuitive understanding that what happened in these quiet spaces was too important to be left to chance, and so the culture wrapped them in stories powerful enough to ensure their protection for generations to come. This journey toward silence began with a raw, powerful simplicity. The earliest sacred builders, working with megaliths at sites like Newgrange in Ireland or the Hypogeum on Malta, relied on one fundamental principle: immense mass. Their strategy was one of overwhelming brute force against sound. They would bury their chambers deep within massive earth mounds or carve them from the living rock, using thousands of tons of stone and soil to create a natural acoustic insulation. The silence they achieved was profound, but it was also monolithic and undifferentiated, a total sensory cut off from the world above. This approach was less about sculpting sound within the space and more about creating a hermetically sealed vessel of quiet, a symbolic return to the womb of the earth that was as much about secrecy and protection as it was about spirituality. The architecture shouted its power through its sheer, silent weight. As civilizations grew more architecturally ambitious, so too did their methods for cultivating quiet. The Greeks and Romans marked a pivotal shift from relying solely on mass to beginning to manipulate form. While they still used thick walls and dense materials, they started experimenting with geometry and space to control sound more elegantly. The Roman development of the arch and the vault was a revolution that went far beyond structural achievement. A barrel vault, for instance, naturally channels sound along its length, allowing architects to direct noise away from areas meant for contemplation and toward openings or less sacred sections of a building. This was a move from simply blocking sound to guiding it, a more nuanced understanding of acoustics that allowed for larger, more complex spaces that could still contain pockets of profound silence. They began engineering quiet into bustling public complexes like the Imperial Fora, where a scholar could find a moment of respite in a vaulted niche, isolated from the crowd just a few feet away. This evolution accelerated dramatically with the rise of Christianity and its unique spiritual demands. Unlike the often communal, outward-facing rituals of ancient polytheistic religions, Christian worship developed a deep inward focus on personal prayer, penitence, and a direct individual connection to God. This shift in spiritual practice demanded a parallel shift in architectural design. The vast, echoing nave of a Romanesque church served the communal mass, but the faithful now needed smaller, more intimate spaces for private devotion. This led to the proliferation of side chapels, choir stalls, and secluded cloisters, each designed as a specialized acoustic environment. The Gothic architects, with their flying buttresses allowing for taller, thinner walls, faced a new acoustic challenge: how to prevent these soaring stone canyons from becoming chaotic echo chambers. Their ingenious solution was a forest of architectural detail. The intricate tracery of stone screens, the deep recesses of sculpted niches, and the complex geometries of ribbed vaults all acted as a sophisticated, built-in sound diffusion system, breaking up sound waves to maintain a reverent hush even within the grandeur. The journey of silent design is a story of continuous refinement, a dialogue between changing belief and advancing technique. What began as the application of overwhelming force gradually matured into a science of subtlety. The medieval mason carving a prayer niche into a cathedral wall was not just creating a place for a candle. He was sculpting the air within that alcove to absorb the whispers of a penitent. This evolution shows us that the pursuit of silence was never static. It was a living tradition, constantly adapting, learning, and inventing. From the earth-covered tombs of the ancients to the sky-piercing splendor of the Gothic cathedral, the blueprint of silence was forever being redrawn, proving that our need for quiet is a constant thread woven through the entire tapestry of human history, forever finding new expression in stone and space. Yet this remarkable legacy of engineered quiet now faces an unprecedented threat, one the ancient architects could never have anticipated: the constant, pervasive hum of the modern world. The very silence they so painstakingly built is under siege from the roar of jet engines overhead, the vibrations of heavy traffic from nearby roads, and the low-frequency din of urban development encroaching ever closer. This isn't merely an aesthetic disturbance, it's a form of acoustic erosion that chips away at the fundamental purpose of these spaces. A whisper that once hung in the air with sacred clarity can now be masked by the distant but persistent rumble of a generator or the faint thrum of a highway, subtly dismantling the immersive experience these sites were designed to create. The challenge is monumental because the enemy is both invisible and omnipresent, seeping through the very stone that once provided perfect insulation. The pressure of mass tourism adds another complex layer to this acoustic crisis. The sheer volume of visitors, while a testament to our enduring fascination with these places, generates its own storm of disruptive noise. The scuff of countless feet on ancient floors, the murmur of multilingual conversations, the rustle of clothing and backpacks, and the inevitable chorus of ringing phones and camera shutters collectively create a cumulative acoustic footprint that can overwhelm the delicate soundscape. This goes beyond mere crowd noise. It's about physics. The presence of large numbers of people inside a stone chamber dramatically alters its acoustic properties. Human bodies are excellent sound absorbers, particularly at higher frequencies. A tour group of 20 people can deaden the reverberation time of a space, fundamentally changing how sound and silence behaves within it, effectively preventing anyone from experiencing the environment as it was originally intended. In response to these threats, a new frontier of conservation has emerged, one that treats silence itself as a priceless artifact in need of preservation. Teams of acoustic archaeologists and engineers now descend upon these sites not just with measuring tapes, but with sophisticated digital audio recorders and calibrated speakers. They conduct impulse response tests, mapping the precise acoustic signature of a chamber to create a sonic baseline. This data is crucial, acting as a diagnostic tool to measure the impact of environmental changes and visitor numbers over time. At some sites, you might even see wireless sensors discreetly placed high on a wall, continuously monitoring for changes in ambient noise levels, humidity, and carbon dioxide, all factors that can subtly degrade the acoustic environment. This scientific approach allows conservators to move beyond guesswork, making informed decisions based on hard data about how many visitors a space can handle and what protective measures are truly necessary. The most extreme and effective preservation strategy is also the most heartbreaking for history lovers: severely restricted access. The hypogeum of Hal Saflieni in Malta stands as the prime example of this necessary sacrifice. This subterranean labyrinth, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, contains chambers with such unique acoustic properties that they are believed to have been used for oracular rituals. To protect the delicate balance of humidity and temperature that preserves the site's structural integrity and its otherworldly acoustics, authorities have imposed draconian limits. Only 80 visitors are permitted per day in small, carefully supervised groups. They enter an elaborate system of airlocks, and their time inside is strictly limited. This isn't about exclusivity, it's a desperate race against time. The exhalations of visitors introduce moisture and heat, which encourage the growth of microorganisms that damage the limestone walls and, over time, could even alter the surface texture of the stone enough to change how it absorbs and reflects sound. Here, human presence itself is the pollutant. This creates an almost impossible ethical dilemma for those tasked with guardianship. How do we balance the public's right to experience this incredible heritage with the absolute duty to preserve it for future generations? Is it better to allow limited, managed access that causes slow degradation, or to seal a site completely, turning it into a museum piece known only through videos and photographs? There is no easy answer. For every site like the hypogeum that chooses extreme restriction, another opts for creative mitigation. Some cathedrals now hold silent hours before official opening times, offering a precious window for visitors to experience the space in near original conditions. Other sites use advanced booking systems to stagger entry and prevent overcrowding, or install specially designed silent flooring in certain areas to dampen the sound of footsteps. These efforts are all part of a global recognition that the silence within these walls is not an accidental leftover, but the very heart of their meaning, a fragile, non-renewable resource that, once lost, can never be truly recreated. So we arrive at perhaps the most compelling question of all. After all this sophisticated engineering, after moving mountains of stone and mastering the physics of sound, what was the ultimate point? Why did silence matter so profoundly? The answer, it turns out, is not a single thread but a rich tapestry of interpretations, each revealing a different facet of the ancient mind. One prominent school of thought argues for a deeply practical, almost theatrical purpose. Consider the Oracle of Delphi, where a priestess, the Pythia, would deliver the cryptic prophecies of Apollo. Historians like Plutarch describe a chamber beneath the temple from which intoxicating vapors emerged, believed to induce her trance. But imagine the scene: a seeker, after a long and arduous journey, finally enters the temple's inner sanctum. The air is thick with the smell of burning laurel leaves and the strange, sweet scent rising from the earth, and it is utterly, unnervingly silent. In that vacuum of sound, every small noise the Pythia makes, a sharp intake of breath, the rustle of her robes, the first guttural syllable of her prophecy, becomes magnified with terrifying significance. The silence wasn't just a backdrop, it was a dramatic amplifier, heightening the sensory and psychological impact of the oracle's pronouncements, making them feel less like human speech and more like a divine voice cracking through the void of creation itself. On the opposite end of the spectrum lies the interpretation of silence as pure symbol. For cultures like the ancient Egyptians, the silent inner sanctuary of a temple was a direct architectural recreation of the primordial waters of Nun, the dark, silent, formless chaos that existed before the first god spoke creation into being. In this view, the silence wasn't a tool for enhancing sound, but a representation of the ultimate reality that precedes and underpins all existence. To enter that silence was to symbolically travel back to the moment before time began, to stand at the source of all things. This transforms the space from a functional building into a profound cosmological symbol. The architecture becomes a three-dimensional map of the universe's origin, and the experience of its silence is a ritual reenactment of returning to that origin point, a way to touch the divine by touching the nothingness from which it emerged. Here, silence matters not for what it does, but for what it is, a living symbol of the ineffable. A more critical, modern interpretation views this controlled silence through the lens of power and social control. This theory posits that restricting access to the most silent areas was a highly effective mechanism for reinforcing social hierarchy. When only the high priest can enter the perfectly quiet inner sanctum, his authority is no longer just based on knowledge or tradition, it is experientially proven. He alone can withstand the profound quiet, he alone can hear the faintest whisper of the god. The common populace, confined to the noisy outer courts, experiences this privilege secondhand, reinforcing the idea that the elite truly are closer to the divine. The silence becomes a political tool, a sensory barrier that legitimizes the power structure by making it feel natural and ordained. The architecture in this reading is a physical manifestation of a social contract where spiritual access is a privilege meticulously doled out by those in charge. Yet, to see it only as a tool of control may be too cynical a reduction. Many scholars advocate for understanding it as a genuine spiritual technology, a practical method for achieving a desired state of consciousness. This interpretation bridges the gap between the symbolic and the practical. We now know from neuroscience that prolonged exposure to silence can reduce cortisol levels, stimulate the growth of new neurons in the hippocampus, and shift brain activity into the alpha and theta waves associated with deep meditation, creativity, and insight. The ancient architects and priests, through meticulous observation over centuries, may have intuitively grasped this connection between environmental quiet and psychological change. They weren't just building silent spaces, they were building psychological incubation chambers. The silence was the active ingredient in a recipe for spiritual experience, a technology designed to reliably induce the trance states, heightened focus, and ego dissolution that facilitated genuine communion with the divine. It was less about theater or control and more about applied cognitive science, a method for hacking the human operating system to achieve transcendence. The most satisfying conclusion is that all these interpretations hold a piece of the truth. Silence was likely all these things at once, a dramatic amplifier, a potent symbol, a tool of social order, and a spiritual technology. Its meaning was not fixed but fluid, changing with the context of the ritual, the status of the participant, and the specific beliefs of the culture. A pharaoh undergoing a coronation right in the depths of a pyramid might have experienced the silence as a symbolic return to the primordial waters. A priestess in a Greek temple might have used it to focus her mind and channel a prophecy. A common citizen witnessing a silent ceremony from afar would have understood it as a demonstration of priestly power. The true genius of the ancient blueprints of silence is that they created spaces complex and nuanced enough to hold all these meanings simultaneously. They built environments that worked on multiple levels: psychological, political, theatrical, and spiritual, proving that their understanding of silence was as deep and layered as the human spirit itself. This profound need to architecturally mediate our relationship with death finds perhaps its ultimate expression in the design of tombs and mausoleums, structures specifically intended to house the eternal quiet of the afterlife. For ancient cultures, death was not an end but a transition to a different state of being, one that was almost universally envisioned as a realm of perfect, unbroken peace. This belief was not left to abstract hope. It was physically engineered into the very stones that would hold the deceased, creating a perpetual silence that mirrored the eternal tranquility they believed awaited the soul. The architecture of death became a bridge between the noisy anguish of the living and the serene silence of the beyond, a tangible promise that the departed had indeed found rest. Nowhere is this more meticulously realized than in the burial practices of ancient Egypt. The journey of a pharaoh's body to its final resting place was a carefully staged acoustic descent into absolute quiet. After the elaborate and very public funerary rites conducted on the outside of the pyramid, the body was taken deep within its geometric heart, down narrow, sloping passages that led to the burial chamber. This chamber was more than just a room. It was a meticulously engineered acoustic vault. The choice of material was paramount. The entire chamber, including the massive sarcophagus itself, was built from incredibly dense red granite. This stone's crystalline structure is a superb absorber of sound energy, particularly the low frequencies of human movement and speech. Once the heavy, multi-ton lid was slid onto the sarcophagus and the priests retreated, sealing the chamber behind them, the occupant was left in a silence so profound it was unlike anything experienced in the world above. This wasn't merely a practical measure to protect against grave robbers, it was a spiritual necessity. It recreated the silent, primordial waters of none, the state of perfect potential that existed before creation. In this eternal, soundless void, the pharaoh's soul could be reborn and begin its journey to the stars, undisturbed for all eternity. The Romans, masters of practical engineering, approached the silence of death with a different but equally intentional strategy. Their vast subterranean catacombs, networks of tunnels honeycombing the earth beneath cities like Rome, used labyrinthine design to cultivate a very specific kind of quiet. A funeral procession would wind its way through these narrow, dimly lit corridors, their twisting paths and identical-looking intersections naturally discouraging loud conversation and forcing a somber, reflective pace. The soft earth and tufa rock walls of these tunnels absorbed sound, creating a muffled, hushed atmosphere that stood in stark contrast to the bustling city life just meters above their heads. This was not the absolute, vacuum-sealed silence of the Egyptian pyramid, but rather a quiet of separation, a sensory and symbolic removal of the dead from the realm of the living. The architecture guided the mourners on a physical and acoustic journey, moving them from the noise of their grief into a space of accepted calm, mediating their anxiety by physically demonstrating the peaceful, secluded rest their loved ones now enjoyed. This architectural silencing served a crucial psychological function for those left behind. The terrifying unknown of death, the fear of decay and oblivion, was a source of deep anxiety for ancient societies. By building tombs that were visibly and audibly peaceful, they created a powerful, tangible counter-narrative to that fear. A grand, silent mausoleum standing in a quiet grove wasn't just a container for bones. It was a permanent statement that death was not a chaotic or frightening end, but a dignified and tranquil transition. The living could visit these places, experience their profound quiet, and feel reassured. The silence was evidence. It allowed them to imagine their ancestors not suffering in some noisy underworld, but resting in a state of serene, dreamless sleep. The builders, in their genius, used the absence of sound as a tool for comfort, crafting stone vessels of quiet that helped the living make peace with mortality itself, offering a sensory promise of eternal rest that words alone could never provide. This ancient quest for quietude did not end with the last stone placed on a Gothic cathedral or the final carving in a rock-cut temple. Instead, the blueprint of silence was carefully preserved, passed down through centuries to find powerful new expression in the hands of contemporary architects who understand our modern, noise-saturated world desperately needs these sanctuaries more than ever. Today's designers of sacred spaces, from minimalist meditation centers to profound public memorials, are not merely copying ancient forms. They are reinterpreting those timeless principles for a new age, proving that the human need for reflective quiet is a constant thread connecting us to our deepest past. They look back to those ancient masters not for historical recreation, but for spiritual and acoustic wisdom, learning how to use form, material, and light to carve out pockets of profound peace within the chaos of contemporary life. Consider the work of the Japanese architect Tadao Ando, a modern master who speaks the language of silence as fluently as any ancient builder. His Church of the Light in Osaka is a stunning example of this dialogue with the past. Ando uses massive, raw concrete walls, a modern material, yet one employed with an ancient understanding of mass and density. These walls do more than define the space. They utterly sever it from the sounds of the surrounding city, creating an acoustic isolation that is both physical and psychological. Then, in a move that would feel deeply familiar to the architects of the Pantheon, he uses a single, precise cut in the concrete, a cruciform slit, to channel not only light but sound. This opening draws the eye and the mind upward, while the thick concrete absorbs ambient noise, fostering a hushed, introspective atmosphere. The effect is a space that feels both utterly modern and primally ancient, a silent sanctuary where the only sounds are those we bring with us in our own hearts and minds. This legacy extends far beyond explicitly religious structures into the realm of secular sacredness, spaces designed for collective memory and personal reflection. The National September 11th Memorial in New York City, with its twin reflecting pools set within the footprints of the former towers, is a powerful case study. The designers faced an immense challenge, creating a place of quiet remembrance in one of the noisiest cities on Earth. Their solution was profoundly ancient in its concept. They created a massive void, a downward space, pulling visitors away from the street-level cacophony. The sound of the city is then actively masked by what is perhaps the most genius feature: a continuous, thunderous cascade of water that pours down the inner walls of the pools. This is not a gentle trickle, it is a monumental curtain of sound. But this sound is predictable, constant, and uniform. It acts exactly like the water features in a Taoist garden or the channeled stream in a Mayan ceremonial center. It provides a blanket of acoustic privacy, using a controlled natural sound to obliterate the unpredictable urban noise, allowing visitors to stand at the edge and experience their own private, silent grief and remembrance within a public space. Even the design of modern concert halls, temples to sound itself, relies on this ancient wisdom to achieve acoustic perfection. The world's most renowned performance spaces, like the Berlin Philharmonic or the Walt Disney Concert Hall in Los Angeles, are marvels of acoustic engineering that secretly employ principles thousands of years old. Their designers, like the ancient Greeks, understand that perfect sound requires the perfect management of silence. They use diffuse reflection, a principle the Romans mastered in their vaults and coffers, scattering sound waves gently across complex, irregular surfaces to prevent harsh echoes and create a warm, enveloping auditory experience for every member of the audience. They strategically place absorbent materials behind panels and in ceilings to eliminate low-frequency rumble and mid-frequency clutter, much like the hollow tubes in Roman walls. The goal is a pristine acoustic environment where the music exists in a pure state, unsullied by the architecture's own sonic signature. In these halls, silence is the canvas upon which the music is painted, and that canvas is prepared using a recipe that is astonishingly ancient. This enduring relevance tells us something fundamental about humanity. In our hyper-connected, perpetually buzzing digital age, the value of true, unmediated silence has skyrocketed. It has become a precious commodity, a necessary antidote to the cognitive overload of modern life. Architects today are responding to this deep, unmet need by looking back to the original blueprints, recognizing that those ancient cultures had already solved the problem of how to design for the human spirit. They understood that silence is not a luxury but a biological and psychological necessity. By studying their work, we learn that creating quiet isn't about simply adding more insulation, it's about intention. It's about designing a journey that allows people to leave the noise behind, about using geometry to guide the ear and the eye toward a state of calm, and about selecting materials that don't just stand up to the elements, but that actively hold and nurture a peaceful atmosphere. This continuous thread of design, stretching from the granite chambers of the pharaohs to the concrete chapels of today, is one of our most vital cultural inheritances, a timeless quest to build not just shelters for our bodies, but havens for our minds. But how can we, in our modern world of constant connectivity and noise, possibly hope to access this ancient experience of silence? The good news is that the profound quiet these architects engineered is not entirely lost to time. With a bit of strategy and a shift in mindset, it is still possible to connect with that powerful, intentional stillness. The first and perhaps most important step is to rethink how you approach a visit to one of these sacred sites. Instead of treating it as another item to check off a tourist itinerary, consider it a pilgrimage for your senses. Plan your visit for the very first opening time in the morning or the last slot before closing. These off hours are magical. The crowds have not yet descended or have already dispersed. The air is often cooler and stiller, and the rising or setting sun casts long, dramatic shadows that heighten the atmosphere. In these precious, quiet windows, the stones themselves seem to exhale, releasing the accumulated energy of the day and returning to their natural state of repose. This is when you can truly begin to listen to the architecture. Once you are there, the real work begins, the internal work of mindfulness. It's not enough to simply be present in a quiet space. You must actively engage with the silence. A powerful technique is to consciously let go of the urge to document everything immediately. Resist the instinct to pull out your phone for a photo the moment you enter a chamber. Instead, just stand there, close your eyes for a moment and take a few deep, slow breaths. Listen to the sound of your own inhalation and exhalation. This simple act does two things. It centers you in your own body, pulling you out of your racing thoughts, and it allows your hearing to adjust to become more acute. In the ensuing quiet, you might start to notice the subtleties of the space, the almost imperceptible hum of the earth, the faint echo of a distant drip of water, the way the air feels different on your skin. This is how you move from being a spectator to a participant, opening yourself up to the emotional and spiritual resonance the builders intended. For those seeking a more guided experience, an incredible innovation has emerged at some of the world's most popular sites, the silent tour. In places like Egypt's Valley of the Kings or the Hagia Sophia in Istanbul, certain operators now offer experiences where participants are given wireless headphones. A guide speaks softly into a microphone, their voice transmitted directly into your ears, eliminating the need for them to raise their voice and break the sanctity of the space. Often, these tours incorporate long, deliberate pauses where you are simply encouraged to sit and absorb the atmosphere without any narration at all. This practice recreates the conditions of a more ancient personal form of worship, allowing the architecture itself to be the primary teacher. It's a profound way to bypass the typical tourist chatter and experience the monument not as a museum exhibit, but as a living, silent testament to human aspiration. And what of the vast majority of us who may never have the opportunity to stand in the king's chamber or beneath the Pantheon's dome? Here, technology, often the source of our noise, offers a surprising solution. The rapid advancement of virtual reality and high-fidelity binaural audio recording is beginning to open a new window into the past. Sound artists and archaeologists are collaborating to create immersive acoustic models of these ancient spaces. Using specialized microphone arrays that mimic human hearing, they capture the unique sonic fingerprint of a site, the way a hand clap decays, the specific resonance of a chant. When paired with a 360-degree VR visual tour, the effect can be startlingly authentic. Wearing a headset, you can virtually stand in the heart of a Neolithic tomb and experience a simulation of its profound quiet, all from your living room. While it cannot fully replicate the palpable energy of being there in person, it provides an accessible and deeply educational tool, democratizing access to these acoustic wonders and preserving their sonic profiles for future generations in a way that photographs alone never could. Ultimately, the quest to experience ancient silence is less about the specific location and more about cultivating an internal state of receptive quiet. These sites are the ultimate teachers, showing us that silence is a skill that can be practiced and honed. The techniques we use to connect with them, mindful breathing, sensory awareness, the conscious elimination of distraction, are the very same tools we can bring back into our daily lives. You can practice this ancient art by finding a moment of quiet in a city park, by sitting in a modest local chapel during a quiet afternoon, or even by creating a small corner of silence in your own home. The goal is to remember that we, too, have the capacity to architect moments of quiet, to design oases of stillness amidst the noise of our own modern world, following a blueprint for peace that is as old as civilization itself. While the acoustic wonders of ancient sites can feel almost supernatural, it's crucial to pull back the curtain of modern mystification and see these achievements for what they truly were: brilliant applications of physics and profound cultural intention, not evidence of lost technologies or otherworldly intervention. The internet is rife with sensational theories claiming the Great Pyramid was a power plant harnessing Earth's energy, or that Stonehenge was built by aliens to communicate across galaxies using resonant frequencies. These narratives, while entertaining, ultimately do a great disservice to the actual people who designed and built these spaces. They strip ancient cultures of their genius, replacing their observable, learnable skills with unprovable magic. The truth is far more impressive. These builders didn't have access to supernatural powers. They had something more valuable: millennia of careful observation, painstaking trial and error, and a deeply refined tradition of craftsmanship passed down through generations. They learned which stones carried sound and which deadened it, how a curved wall could diffuse a shout into a whisper, and how a specific chamber shape could make a heartbeat sound like a drum. This was a hard-won science of experience, not a mystical secret. It's also important to recognize that the pursuit of silence wasn't always for benevolent or uplifting purposes. The same architectural principles that created a serene sanctuary for meditation could also be employed to construct a terrifying oubliette, a dungeon designed for solitary confinement and sensory deprivation. The power of absolute silence is a neutral tool. Its moral value depends entirely on the intention behind its use. In the hands of a spiritual guide, it could facilitate enlightenment and connection. In the hands of a tyrant, it could become a devastating instrument of psychological control and punishment. There are ancient cells carved deep into the rock beneath palaces and fortresses, where prisoners were left in utter blackness and complete silence. In these spaces, the absence of sound wasn't peaceful, it was maddening, a weapon used to break the human spirit by depriving it of any external reference point. This duality reminds us that architecture is a reflection of human nature itself, capable of embodying both our highest aspirations for transcendence and our darkest impulses for domination. Furthermore, the unique acoustic effects we measure today, like the specific resonances in certain chambers, were likely discovered accidentally long before they were ever engineered intentionally. A builder might have noticed that his voice carried strangely in a particular cave, or that a specific rock formation created an eerie echo, and then later sought to replicate that effect in a constructed sacred space. This process of discovery and refinement is the very foundation of science. To attribute these effects to aliens or advanced lost civilizations is to ignore the incredible capacity for human curiosity and innovation. It suggests that our ancestors were incapable of such feats on their own, a perspective that is both historically inaccurate and deeply condescending. Their ingenuity is not diminished because we can explain it, it is magnified. The fact that they achieved such precision with rudimentary tools, relying on their ears, their hands, and their accumulated knowledge, makes their accomplishments all the more remarkable. By consciously choosing to demystify these ancient wonders, we don't make them less special, we make them more accessible and far more inspiring. We shift our appreciation from a passive wonder at imagined magic to an active admiration for tangible human skill. We can look at the precisely angled walls of an Egyptian tomb and understand the acoustic principle behind them, marveling at the builder's intuitive grasp of sound wave behavior. We can study the layered construction of a Roman wall and see the early origins of modern soundproofing technology. This grounded perspective allows us to connect with these ancient craftsmen and designers on a human level, to see them as fellow problem solvers who used the materials and knowledge available to them to shape experiences and manifest their beliefs in stone. Their legacy is not a collection of unsolvable mysteries, but a timeless lesson in how to use our environment intentionally, teaching us that the most powerful technologies are often those that work in harmony with the fundamental laws of nature and the deepest needs of the human spirit. And so, as we emerge from the hushed sanctuaries of the past, we carry with us a profound new understanding that these ancient blueprints of silence represent far more than architectural marvels. They are the physical evidence of a timeless human dialogue with the infinite. For millennia, across every continent and culture, we have instinctively reached for the same tool to shape our encounter with the sacred, the intentional, crafted absence of sound. From the incomprehensible mass of the Great Pyramid to the mathematically precise curves of the Pantheon's dome, from the rock-cut womb chambers of India to the labyrinthine catacombs beneath Rome, we see a universal impulse to build doors into the quiet, to design portals out of the noise of the everyday and into a space where a different kind of listening can begin. This wasn't merely about creating emptiness. It was about making room for a fuller presence, about using stone and geometry to curate an environment where the spirit could finally hear itself think, and perhaps hear something else answering back. What these ancient masters teach us is that silence is not a void to be feared or filled, but a medium to be shaped, a fundamental material of human experience, as crucial as light, space, and form. They understood, long before modern neuroscience could confirm it, that quietude is a powerful catalyst for the mind, capable of reducing stress, enhancing memory, and unlocking states of creativity and insight. Their buildings were the original therapeutic landscapes, designed to give the overloaded brain a place to rest, reset, and reconnect with a deeper sense of meaning. In their silent sanctuaries, we find the earliest recognition that our external environment directly shapes our internal world, and that by architecting peace into our surroundings, we can invite it into our souls. This ancient wisdom feels startlingly urgent today, in our era of relentless digital noise and cognitive overload, offering a powerful antidote to the fatigue of modern life. The true legacy of these spaces, therefore, is not locked in the past. It lives on in every modern architect who designs a meditation room with sound-absorbing materials, in every city planner who carves out a quiet park amidst urban sprawl, and in every one of us who seeks a moment of respite from the clamor. It's a legacy that challenges us to reconsider our own relationship with sound and its absence, to ask ourselves how we might design more moments of intentional quiet into our own lives, our homes, and our communities. The ancient blueprint is not a relic, it's an invitation, a call to remember that we, too, have the power to build sanctuaries, whether from stone, from habit, or simply from choice. By valuing and protecting these ancient quiet places, we do more than preserve history. We safeguard a vital human technology for well-being, ensuring that future generations will always have a place to go when they need to remember how to listen to the stillness and to what speaks within it. If this journey into the soundless spaces of history has offered you a moment of quiet reflection, a new way of listening to the past, we would be truly honored if you shared that experience with us. Liking this video helps others discover these hidden stories, and subscribing to the channel ensures you won't miss our next exploration into the world's greatest historical mysteries. But beyond that, we are genuinely curious about your own encounters with silence. Have you ever stood in an ancient place and felt the weight of its quiet? Have you discovered a modern sanctuary that made you think of these ancient principles? The conversation doesn't end here, it continues in the comments below. Your personal stories and insights are what transform a monologue into a dialogue, helping all of us see these ideas through new eyes. From the bottom of our hearts, thank you for spending this time exploring the blueprints of silence with us. We wish you the very best on your own journey, and we hope you find, or perhaps even create, your own small sanctuaries of quiet in the world